Okay, so I'm going to talk about Firebase and Vue.js, and I think actually, doing the breakout rooms was really, really helpful because it gave me a better picture of where everybody's at, and I can kind of relate to pretty much everything that we're talking about. We wanted to do an app. There's been 4 of us that worked on this, and 2 of us more intensely over the past year or so. And Jim, my co-founder, is actually calling in from Portland as well, so he's in the meeting too. But we wanted to do a networking app, and we wanted to do a networking app to enable people to connect better. We're thinking of sort of the Docker and Kubernetes model of the world. It's easy to do virtualization. Well, why isn't there a similar kind of thing in networking? We do all these one-on-one meetings. You meet somebody for coffee or online or over a Zoom chat or whatever. Then you put people into a LinkedIn box, and a week later you can't remember who they were. It just doesn't work very well. But as freelancers, especially, and we thought pretty early on that freelancers need to network even more often than everybody else, and especially tech freelancers, you just really want to have sort of a bigger virtual network. And we thought Firebase and Vue were really good ways to do this. Actually, we originally did a prototype in Flutter and actually in React before that. So I'll get into talking about this, and I'll try to stay somewhat on track. So I'm co-founder. Basically the idea of the company is networking is broken. It's very, very piecemeal, very slow, and very tedious, and just not what it could be. And we wanted to apply natural language processing, machine learning, AI, whatever you want to call it. That's why we got AI in the name, to your profile, and basically create a virtual network based on that. We started out with the idea. There's a lot of other, I could spend probably about 2 or 3 hours talking about networking apps of various kinds that are out there, but probably the closest thing to this is lunchclub.ai. Lunchclub tries to use AI to enable you to connect with other people and set up a meeting. And so their basic idea is you would do a meeting maybe 2 hours next Thursday afternoon. And you'd like to talk to people that are also somewhere in the US, and they're also interested in machine learning or some specific topic, but it's not really freelancer focused, and it's not more specific than that. And we just thought, well, if there were a way for people to be able to have a virtual network of things that are relevant to what you want to work on, especially as a freelancer, you always have some additional piece in a project that turns out that's going to take 9/10 of your time. And if you had that expertise, or you knew somebody you could bring into it, or you could drop into a project with somebody else, or just staying up to date. And we wanted, initially we thought of this as, you would do ratings of people. And Lunch Club tries to do that. A lot of the other expert-oriented and networking systems do that as well, that you're going to rate your connections. And at a certain point, it just occurred to us, why even do that? Because if you have an NLP function that's running based on your profile, and we're starting out obviously just with simple matching, but if you have a way that your profile reflects who you are, that should be sufficient. So we're doing a Vue front end for this because we wanted to be able to have it run on phones as well as on web, desktop and laptop kind of systems. And that was really the best environment for it. We wanted to do something that was probably a little bit more up to date than React, but we can talk about that. There's a lot going on in both worlds. And this is the second startup that I've been involved in. I previously was in a software group at Intel. I was the strategy manager for the software platforms group, actually, and we did simulators and compilers. And I was a product line manager before that. Now, I was originally a University of Chicago marketing MBA. I was absolutely lucky to be at the right place at the right time to get hired into that group at Intel, because I had no background in any of the relevant technology. But my original background is actually as a PhD in comparative literature. I was a Fulbright fellow. I've done some things with various languages, cats that are unterbeschäftigt, Chinese cats, cats that are in French, cats that are in Japanese, etc. But actually, that's sort of happened in the meantime. There's a lot of other things that we were interested in studying originally, but I've always been interested in how do people network and how do connections happen, how does change happen? And that's something that applies across literature. The other thing that you want to know about me as background is, sorry, I'm a Green Bay Packers stockholder. I inherited some stock. So, Aaron Rodgers, we've got to get the right photo in here. So the main point of this was to talk about, though, Firebase and Vue.js. And Firebase has been around for several years. Originally, it was written as a platform for doing messaging. And then in the process of doing that, the developers found that they really needed to have real-time messaging capability in the database to synchronize things. And then Google bought them and turned it into sort of their front-end introduction to a bigger data kind of system. Vue similarly kind of evolved out of just scratching somebody's itch. Even Yo, who is the developer of it originally, was working at Google doing human interface testing and design kind of projects. And he just thought there ought to be an easier way to do this. We should have kind of a component structure that would enable you to easily put together human interface and reactive components. So the two of them together, really reasons to use them include, well, you get authentication for free, basically, with Firebase. There's just some things to set up, and you could do authentication based on email, based on logging in as Google or LinkedIn or Twitter, whatever you want to do for that. And also, Firebase is really kind of a good environment for doing CSV and JSON imports and exports. We're also working with HubSpot which is like Salesforce, if people are familiar with that, for doing marketing and being able to track who you've contacted. And then they also provide storage. I think everybody's familiar at some point with S3 on Amazon Web Services. Actually, I think all of us had some background in Amazon before moving to Google Cloud a couple of years ago. And the storage environment is something that's really a basic part of this as well. And then there's extensions that have happened just in the past, I'd say 12 to 16 months. There are Firebase extensions for things like incorporating Stripe. So if you want to set up a subscription-based service for an application that you're doing, there's a lot of advantages to that. The reasons to use Vue, I think it's sort of, it comes down to a matter of opinion, but we like the idea that it was a slightly more modern environment than React, and we can debate what that is exactly. It certainly is a bigger ecosystem than Flutter, which is what I started in. Flutter is an environment that Google's doing to do cross-platform object generation. They'll run on iPhone and Androids and on desktops. The desktop part is going a little bit more slowly. So we decided that we should do this in Vue instead. It should be really an ideal environment for prototyping. And it's kind of a developing environment. But the issues with Firebase and Vue.js are really, I'll turn on this video here, it's just overwhelming a small team, how many changes are happening. And we'll talk about what all the changes are in the environment. It's just too much to keep track of. Another kind of downside, frankly, is that the documentation is written by Google. And I tend to think of Google as being very similar to Intel in the sense that we didn't have to figure out how to get anything to be usable by anybody because they had to use it. And there's a real problem with that at a certain point. Google documentation, there's a lot of it, but it's really hard to make heads or tails of it. And there's also a lot of change going on. The third thing is that the Vue ecosystem is really a lot smaller than the React ecosystem, and it's changing a lot more rapidly. So if you're thinking about doing something in Vue or doing something in React, I think on the one hand, it kind of depends on what your working environment it is, but on the other hand, it depends on how comfortable you are with rapid rate of change and with a smaller ecosystem, because we certainly have that in this realm. Let's see if I can get on here. Vue 2, the Vue.3s, Vue 3 is the biggest change that's been going on currently. Vue 3 came out about a year ago. And it totally changed the model for, well, I would say totally, it significantly changed the model for how you write code for an application. There's a composition API, which you basically, the model was that you define a particular component, like a navigation bar, a menu bar, whatever it might be, some element that you're going to use throughout your application. Then you put the HTML into that as a template, you put the script into it as a template, and you also put the CSS into it. So you have everything in one place. I mean, CSS could be across the entire code platform as well, but you can also do it scoped. So CSS only applies to that particular component. So we wrote an application initially using Vue.js 2, and the stack there is Axios, which is a really kind of common basic for connecting things. Bootstrap, which has become kind of tailwind in the meantime, is pretty hot there. And then Firebase, we were using Firebase version 8, and they've gone to 9 in the meantime. We'll talk about that. And then most importantly, Vuex and Vuefire. And these are kind of, these are the environments, the libraries that we use for connecting to data on the back end. And as of July, they were just kind of left hanging. We're going to talk about, how that's evolving in the meantime. So Firebase 8 and Firebase 9 also changed this summer. For a long time, Google seemed to be kind of just sitting there with the Firebase environment at the same model. But when you built an image, it was actually fairly large because you imported the entire library for Firebase or Firestore for authentication, et cetera, instead of just the functions that you need. So now it can get much smaller. They also introduced in the summer Firebase emulators, which lets you run on a local system the same database, the same data store that you would have in the cloud. So instead of having a surprise $30,000 bill because you did something wrong in the cloud environment, you can run it locally. It's just much safer and easier to work with. But it took a little bit of work to figure out how to work with that, and there is a learning curve. And in terms of the resources, if people are interested in getting into the Firebase environment, especially if you're just sort of starting into it, I really think, this guy, Net Ninja, Sean Pelling in England, he just does an incredible job on practically every coding environment that comes along that's hot and new. He's done stuff on Go, he's done stuff on various React things, JavaScript environment, Firebase, et cetera. And he's done a series on Vue 3 and also on Firebase 9. So it's a great way to get into it initially. But if you want to actually go on Stack Overflow and look for how to solve a specific problem that you're running into, it always ends up being these 3 people who are part of the Google evangelist group that answer the questions. Renaud Tarnac is in France, Frank van Puffelen is originally from Holland, and Doug Stevenson, I think, left Google about a year ago, but still writes a lot about Firebase related things. So that's my tip. The other tip in terms of doing Google queries to find answers to how to do particular things is always put in a time element. So you want things that only happened in the past year, past 3 months, past 6 months, whatever it might be. And as I mentioned, the libraries that we depended on for connection to the back end of Firestore have really changed and gone away. Vuefire was the standard. There's a new environment called Pinia, which is replacing Vuex. It gives you basically mutations and commits and a way to do functions that basically interact with a local store. Our architecture is basically modeled on the idea that the client is presenting data that is changeable in the Firestore backend, but it's not actually being maintained in any way on the local host. So we want to be able to have a connection, a library that connects us to the backend. And it looks now like Pinia is the way forward, and it's really just been starting to get developed in the past couple of months. So that's another issue with this environment. Infrastructure. One of the things that's interesting about the Vue environment overall, even Yo, is that it's really been a lot has been going on in Chinese for this environment. As with Go, there's a lot of interest in China in it as well. And even is kind of a hero for the local environment, in China, because it's the first time you've had somebody that really is bilingual and, is seen as an architecture leader in both areas. But there's several other people that are doing interesting things here too. And one of the tools that we're looking at or using is Vite, which even also started the project on that as a replacement for Webpack. And it basically lets you use ECMAScript ES6 modules in your environment and have a much smaller image that results from it that's built much more quickly. So, and then, I hate to say it, but I really thought that the fall here, the November, December, October timeframe was when we're going to be integrating web calling, video calling into the application. But there were so many things that changed in the environment that we've kind of gotten bogged down in just keeping up to date on that. But we did want to incorporate WebRTC. We did about a year ago a basic prototype in Vue using the WebRTC environment. But if you want to have video calling that is actually robust and reliable on the back end, then you probably want to work with somebody like Twilio or Daily.co. Twilio is kind of the 800-pound gorilla in this space. Daily.co has made many of the same kind of functions available much more easily. And SignalWire was started more recently, but it's really evolved out of an open source project. And then Mux is another one that's really happening a lot there. But WebRTC, Web Video Real-Time Communications, that basically has been in Firefox and Chrome and so on for about 10 years. And it really only was just with the pandemic and the need to do a lot more video calling that all of a sudden everybody got much more interested in it. So that's an environment that's been available for a while. So the issues in sum, when we think about all this environment, the environment that we want is not really quite there yet. If you want to use the Vue 3 realm, but it probably will be within the next 2 or 3 months. And it's got a very fast rate of change in it as well. We've been kind of surprised at how long the changeover has taken. I mean, I think both Jim and I have been through the Python realm, and it took like 10 years practically for Python 2 to become Python 3. So I suppose we shouldn't really be grumbling too much about only taking a year to do the changeover here. But and then there's the question of what should you do coming from React? How should you get into it? I think it kind of depends on what your learning style is. I would like to say that there's one particular environment to recommend or project to get involved in or whatever, but several people mentioned doing Vue projects of one sort or the other, and I assume that all of those are really Vue 2. It's probably a good place to stay for the next couple of months anyway. And it seems like all the things that we need are really going to come together early in 2022. We also have organizational decisions that we need to make. We just started early access with a prototype of our application in the past month. And we're basically enabling freelancers to sign up for early access to it, which we're going to probably be doing in the first quarter next year. And we basically have a legacy app that we run on a DigitalOcean server, but we're working entirely with Google Cloud Platform. Probably the application is going to be, app.marmalade.ai. You won't see that. Oops, I want to go back here. And we made some changes ourselves too, in addition to things changing in the environment. We started out doing design because we were basically meeting 2 times a week over Zoom and using Jira and story maps, add on to that to do design work initially. And then we just found that it was so slow, and GitHub introduced this concept of, or product area of issues and projects, Kanban boards. And that really is much faster. And we've kind of moved, we've been really happy to move to that. We also had, during the summer, we had 3 summer interns working with us. One person working on, because we originally wrote the website in a Go platform, a Go framework called Go Hugo. And we wanted to move that to Gatsby. And then we had somebody else who's working on the marketing information, all the stuff that we're putting in HubSpot, et cetera. And then we had somebody else who's working actually doing, we did some mob programming, we did some pair programming online, et cetera, on the test environment. And that was kind of fun to do, but now we're trying to figure out how do we get to the next stage and how do we enable freelancers to get involved in it. I think the good news in all of this is that nothing significant has changed about VS Code or GitHub. I'm assuming that everybody here, including the people that are just going through code school, has had some exposure to that. And we're really happy that that's been a constant. So I don't know, we can really kind of go either 2 ways. We can be conservative, which I'm suggesting everybody else do, or we can be radical and just try to move ahead and move to entirely to an untested environment, because we know that's going to be the future. And it's just kind of gradually coming together. we really need help with getting people involved who want to work on this as a project, because we're basically interested in, when we looked at the people that are freelancing, it's a 30-something demographic. It's very multicultural. People really want to be valued for their expertise. They don't want to be in a static, bigger company environment. And also the amount of time that people are in companies as software developers has really gone down as you get younger in age. The average is now something like a year and a half for people that are in their 20s, and freelancers are probably, even the leading edge of that. So they really need a way to remove bias. We just wanted to get rid of the sort of the old boy network about who hires who in bigger, older company environments. And we wanted to find a way to cut our ecological footprint, make it much easier to work with people that are not near you. And I think when we started out, we had sort of the starry-eyed idea that we would enable people in Hyderabad, who were experts in machine learning, to work on projects in New York. Well, okay, there might be some of that, but for the most part, it's really just enabling people to get outside of their local geography and connect with people that might be in Austin, Texas, or Miami, Florida, or whatever, and doing the same, they're doing the same thing, and they could really help you on a project, or you could help them on some project. So we wanted to overall change the way people work and make it much more fluid. So with that, I didn't say very much about Firebase itself. It's an object environment that you import into an application, and then you can work with your objects in your database connection. I'm assuming a lot in terms of, I think all of us had some background with PostgreSQL previously, and other, traditional SQL relational database environments. We've just sort of ignored the schema aspect of it, but we're starting to get more serious about that now. What else to say about it? Yeah, that's probably about it. So I should find out what questions we have, and where you guys want to take this.
I've got a quick question that can help kind of get things started.
Yeah.
So one of the things that I think is a common question people have when they look at like NoSQL databases, like Cloud Firestore, for example. I know you mentioned that you're using it in a schemaless fashion. How do you handle situations where, like, okay, you start with, say, a user object, and a user object has like, a first name and a last name and an email address. If you want to add more information to that or change the shape of that user object, now you don't have a schema, so making changes to that user object is really easy because you can just add new fields. But what happens when you have to migrate to a new format, whether you have a schema or not in that circumstance? Has that been a problem you've run into? And does Firebase have any tools for managing that, or ViewFire?
Yeah, Jim, do you want to talk about that a little bit, or should I just sort of go off on it?
I could mention that it depends, of course, on the types of changes. It's very similar to the problem with like a REST API, where somebody comes along. As long as you say add new fields, maybe that's okay, because then somebody can start to use that new field. It doesn't break anything. But let's say you used to have first name, you used to have name, which had the first name and last name in it, and now you have first name and you have last name, and so then all of a sudden now things referring to name don't work anymore. So we don't really have any tools to answer. The short answer to your question is no. There's no special great tools, and really, in my opinion, when people talk up NoSQL databases because it's schemaless, it's a little misleading, because like you said, you can make breaking changes, and you just have to keep up with the code. Your front end code has to match your back end code. Even if there's no schema per se, you still have to expect or know where that data is going to be. So for us, we're still in kind of very much rolling prototype. So we just rewrite stuff and, we fix it so that it works together, but we don't have like a public API at this point. So we don't have to worry about other people trying to keep up.
Totally. Does using TypeScript help you all version that at all a little bit, or does it help you identify those inconsistencies if they ever happen? or is it pretty easy to just like roll forward, like you said, because it's, small team, early days, stuff like that?
Well, as far as TypeScript goes, we're thinking that we're going to move to that on the client side, but Jim's actually working with that currently on the Cloud Function side. So probably that's going to be part of the path going forward. And I don't know if we can really answer your question of that, but I mean, it's sort of like, it's another factor in here is really the TypeScript factor.
Right on. Way cool. Does anybody else have any questions?
I wanted to say one thing on Brandon's question about the database schema list problem and basically adding things to it. There's a couple of other things there. One is that I think we just kind of assumed, as Jim was suggesting, that for the first couple thousand, couple 10,000, et cetera, users of this, we don't really worry about it. We might want to move to some kind of more relational database environment down the road, but we probably realized, things are going to change in some way. So having as much flexibility as possible is probably good, even though we like schemas. The other thing is that for moving data in and out of different environments, if you end up mainly with JSON and CSVs, that's sort of like the common denominator. It's like, are these ever going to go away? I don't know. I don't think so. It's like the spreadsheet. We would just keep on doing variations on spreadsheets.
Totally. I think that's one of the really powerful things about Firebase. One of the things I like quite a bit about it is just the fact that it's pretty easy to migrate data in or out using Google's first-party tooling, or like you said, once you have a client-side connection to it, or cloud, you can write a cloud function to extract the stuff too. You can just like plop it out into a set of JSON objects, or pretty trivially get it output to CSV, and then you're in business and you can do whatever you want after that. It's really, really slick. Cool.
Got a question here.
Yeah, go ahead.
Oh, can you talk a little bit about maybe how you are using Firebase Auth in connection with like the profile schema that you have going on? I've worked with it a little bit in that context where like you're using authentication, you have, some very basic properties that Firebase is handling, but then you also need all this stuff like you're talking about for a profile, like custom things that are specific to an application, and like, how are you linking those two and keep them in sync and that kind of stuff?
Yeah, we are, you mean custom claims? I think it's the Google term for that.
Well, I think you talk more about like your profile, right? That you're feeding more into your modeling and things like that. So, I mean, you're taking Firebase as your authentication, then how do you link that up with someone's, profile and all of this data that you guys are?
Yeah, one of the things that I didn't mention is that Firebase, one of the advantages, actually, the Firebase Firestore environment is the rules, security rules. So you can define at the database level who has access to what information. And so sort of the first level of that, well, I guess this level 0 essentially, is anybody can have access to anything. but level 1 would be like, you can only have access if you're logged in to data, but you can access everybody's data. And then the next level would be, you can only access your own data. And by your own data, we're probably going to mean people that are on your virtual network, et cetera, that are in the same group. But to be quite candid about it, we know that there's like custom claims. We know that there's group models, et cetera. We haven't really worked any of that out yet. It's kind of just play it by ear. Actually, you could probably tell us what to do.
Jordan, one thing I did a long time ago on a project was, since Firebase gives you like a unique ID for every user that's created, and you can't, they limit you to very specific fields for like their, I can't remember what they're called, basically their user data. It's like email, first name, last name. And so what I did is I just took I made collections based upon the user ID that's generated, and then just added, like whatever else I wanted for that user, like, personal preferences, images, last login, all that stuff. So that's how I did it. And I don't know if that's correct, but it worked well.
Yeah, that's pretty much what we're doing too. There's Fireship, I think it is fireship.io. I never remember the name of the guy, but he's got some really good stuff about data structures in Firestore and how to use them.
Yeah, I worked on a similar stack with, it had GCP, Firebase, and then kind of a Go API and a React front end, that kind of whole stack where, like you said, you'd use, you do it from the Firestore auth and then basically toss it into a database as this is your record now. So I was kind of curious if that's similar to other people have done it, or, because we had problems helping, keeping on the line sometimes too, but like just kind of making Firebase the source of truth and calling it good, so.
Well, one of the big questions that we're going to have, frankly, I mean, I talk about sort of the marketing or social aspects of this as well, but it really goes into the database design, is are people going to want to talk to people that they don't know? And to me anyway, it's just like, would you read a book by somebody you don't know? Well, I guess if it's relevant, I probably would. So, but how much information do people want to have access to there? And I think it's important to give people a sense of, you have control over what information is publicly available about you and what people are using to find you. But one of our co-founders, Vivian, had really pointed out the idea a while back that you wanted to see this kind of platform as a way to get discovered and a way to do discovery, and figuring out just what the right balance is for how people feel comfortable with that is pretty important. We try to get on every other platform that we run into that has anything to do with either networking or video conferencing to get a feel for what do they like and what are their downsides, et cetera. So it's been pretty interesting. The breakout room idea seems to be one of the best things that's going at this point. One of the areas that we want to integrate is Calendly just introduced, well, this week actually, meeting polls. So you have 5 people that are invited to a meeting, and you let people vote on, here are the times that you think would be the best time for me, and other people vote for what they're going to want. Well, it gets really complicated pretty fast. And so now we're kind of thinking, well, maybe this is not really quite ready for prime time yet. It needs a couple months of getting sorted out. So keep it as simple as possible for how people do networking.
The focus of this networking, like video interactions, or is there any content side to this? Is there moderation you have to do there? Or
well, we've talked about the idea of having partner companies that that would put basically web content into, because we're focused initially on digital marketing, machine learning, and UX design. Those are the 3 freelancer areas. And we looked at like 10,000 profiles of people that were doing freelancing in 10 different areas, and we just kind of sorted out through them, what were the ones that seemed to be most copacetic to what we wanted to do initially. But yeah, it's not clear how we would do that. Yeah.
Craig,
Yeah.
the stack you're using literally is identical to what I use on a daily basis for like 3 different projects: Bootstrap, Vue, Vuex, etc.
Are you busy?
And yeah, pretty busy. I was curious. So you mentioned that you're looking to use Pania and Vue 3, and I literally have spent like the last week looking into migrating to those, like the best way to do that, just to stay current. Have you migrated already? And if so, I was curious what that was like.
We've migrated about, I would say, 15 or 20 times. And every time it ends up being like, oh man, we're looking over the edge of the cliff here. This doesn't look good. And thank God for GitHub, because you can always go back. But I think that currently, we should just do a side conversation about this. It looks like probably the best way to approach this is from the Firebase 8 and Firebase 9 change first, because that, even though it's a big change, that's the simplest one. And then the next thing is the authentication, because that's pretty simple too. And then you kind of go from there. But yeah, have you come across Vue Use, USE?
I don't think so.
Oh, okay. Well, that's another Anthony Fu project. The same guy that wrote VTest and wrote Vite. And
No, I have them. I know what you're talking about. Yep.
Yeah. They're trying to do basically one of the more blessed libraries in the Vue 3 realm. That helps a little bit, but anyway, we ought to compare notes. No, we don't have any magic solution. No.
No worries. Yeah, I was just curious. It's a big change in a lot of ways.
It is a lot bigger than we would have thought. Yeah.
So as someone who's not in the Vue space at all, what are just a very high level, what breaks from Vue 2 to 3? I understand there's a new like composition API and a couple changes, but that seems kind of opt-in to me, but I don't know.
Well, I think back in the React realm, the big thing was Redux, and various models on how do you connect with data. And there were a bunch of them. And then finally it sort of settled down on Redux, and there were a couple of environments for working with that. So I would say it's similar in the sense that the data models change, but also how you present, how you structure information locally has changed significantly. So the setup or composition API model is that you basically put all of your functions in one place, and it's very different than the Vue 2 realm. But the simpler your code is, the better, probably. I'm not really answering your question very well.
There's not most things that are in Vue 2 you can still use in Vue 3. However, somebody said this to me yesterday, actually I was getting their opinion. They said going from Vue 2 to Vue 3 is kind of like going from Angular JS to Angular. And I don't know if that's a fair comparison, but in some ways I could see how you would feel that way from a syntax standpoint, because of how you work with, like Craig said, like how you work with data. And it really feels like Vue is trying to mimic React hooks, and in a lot of ways to I don't know, compartmentalize your logic, and it does do that. But if you're used to Vue 2, it's like, oh, what in the world? Like, this is very different. So
yeah,
Gotcha. Yeah, that makes sense. Yeah, and I know I guess maybe it is Vue 3. I've seen when hooks were released with React back in 2019. And then I saw experiments with Vue, I think from Evan Yu was doing that. And yeah, I guess that's what this must be. Because
it's pretty much what it is. It's just hooks. It's their version of hooks, but it's just so different from the way you used to work in Vue 2, and it's quite a bit different from React, actually, how you set them up.
Yeah.
Yeah, there's also the what do you call it? The timing of when a module becomes available. One of the other things that we've been dealing with here that I didn't talk about was the move to ECMAScript modules. I guess I just mentioned it quickly in passing, but that's been a big change as well, because we're no longer requesting things, we're importing things, and then in the Vue world, you have to change some things to do that.
What's your experience with Vite or Vite so far? I've heard about it. It seems like it's a really interesting thing to get into. But were you on Webpack before, or now?
Yeah, we use Webpack for the Vue 2 stuff. Yeah. Yeah, and Vite seems to work fine.
Okay.
It's like a night and day comparison in terms of speed. It's like it's basically instant.
It's so fast. Did anything happen here? How did they do that?
And it's what's cool about Vite is it's not you don't have to use it just with Vue. It can really be used with pretty much anything.
Is it a bundler then? I mean, does it create bundles? Or
yeah,
I would define it. Yeah, as a bundler.
It's kind of it's sometimes described. Yeah, it's described as a non-bundling bundler.
It looks like it uses ES build underneath, which is written in Go, so it gets rid of that JavaScript runtime thing that Webpack and Babel use.
Sure.
Exactly.
Yeah.
I think Richard has his hand raised.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, there's just the day job etiquette of hands up, don't jump in. Yeah, that's super cool. I'm gonna have to leave after this, but I've really enjoyed chatting with everyone, and I'll definitely be back. I'm kind of curious, how much does the tech stack and the effort going into this, how much does that distract from the business side of things, to be able to iterate and develop and find, you know, the right fit or find what you're looking for? I'm kind of curious, you know, how much time is spent, you know, tech versus, you know, how much does that get in the way or hinder from time spent on sort of the business and finding a good fit and that side of things?
Well, yeah, I mean, you know, if you're a small organization, everything distracts. Making a sandwich for lunch distracts, you know. But in terms of the business model, I think, you know, it really helped to have interns during the summer, because it helped us sort of focus in each area and package up what we were doing. And one of the things that came out of that was realizing that probably the best areas for us to look for, you know, people who would give us feedback and be early users for this are people that are doing freelancing in the areas themselves, that have written reviews of other products, like, you know, everything from Discord to, you know, lunchclub.ai, et cetera. And then also meetups that are, I mean, there's not any here that I know of, but there are, like in New York and Chicago and the West Coast, meetups that have to do with freelancing in digital marketing. I think actually we have a digital marketing one here, but I haven't gotten connected with that yet. But those are areas where we could get feedback from people too, as early users. And that's sort of the approach that we're taking, is just, you know, concentrate on those and figure out how to get actually to be useful. Keep it as simple as possible and figure out how to make it useful for them first. We think that the video calling is an important part of this, but maybe it's not that relevant. You know, Lunch Club is really the closest thing, lunchclub.ai, to what we're doing, and yet they're happy with a model of you plan a meeting or two for a week from now, instead of, you know, we think we're more accurate, more real time, and more appropriate because it's a more useful connection. So there was an Amazon Web Services person I talked to a few months ago. I asked how often did he think the connections were useful on Lunch Club, and he said 7% of the time. Oh, and I thought, well, that's kind of an exact number. You mean like plus or minus? What do you do about these other ones? It's all serendipity. You know, it turns out you both are interested in bicycling or bass fishing or whatever. Yeah, well, that's part of it. So they have churn as part of that model. And that's one of the things that I think, to answer your question about the business side of it, we see churn as an important metric, because if people try the platform, if they're the right person for it, and then they decide to leave because it's not worth their while, then we're not doing the right thing yet. And it's really easy to not do the right thing. So
it's really interesting. Like the whole world of JS is very new to me. You know, and more Python, R, you know, that kind of stack. And so things don't change as much as I'm hearing here, exactly, at least for what we're working with. So that's why I'm kind of asking that question. For the kind of work that we do, it's all very research based for clients. And okay, well, here's pretty much our stack. It's either this or it's C++ for something else. And you know, there's not a lot of, you not spend a lot of time on the tech stack per se. It's, you know, how do I implement, you know, the research problem in that domain, and using the tools that don't really change that much on me. I don't have a lot of movement underneath me per se. And so I find it kind of interesting of just kind of bundle, and it's just, I don't know, maybe I'm showing my age a bit, but it's just kind of like, okay, wow, that's a lot to really take on. And it seems to be churning quite a bit. So,
well, I think in the data science world, you've had some of that with regard to like Jupyter notebooks and Colab, Google Colab, stuff like that. You know, ways to make it easier to get set up.
Yeah, I mean, I think like for where I'm at, like that's not something that's really availed of, and then there's definitely strong opinions around those sort of. I think they're great. My perspective, I think they're great for, you know, tutorials or kind of get going, but I think they suffer a lot from state, and I would sort of posit somewhat poor engineering practices too. You can really get yourself in a lot of trouble if you don't go back and clean up your code and take applied best practices too. I think it's great to kind of get going and do your EDM, exploratory data modeling and stuff. But after that, if you don't, they can really become kind of a liability. So I think they're good, but I think there are a lot of people who are more comfortable with just, you know, IPython or you know, and working through the scripts and knowing it's sort of, but anyways, yeah.
Well, do you maintain analyses that you did, you know, a year or 2 years ago, that sort of thing, and keep them running, or how does that work?
It depends on the client. It really depends on the client and such. There are like models that have been running for the last, you know, 10, 15 years. A lot of it will just be, you know, either ad hoc or technical service kind of based, or you know, kind of one-offs, or it's internal type of research moving in directions. But they're pretty compartmentalized. You know, a tool from one project might be applied to other projects and built on, but for the most part, they're kind of very compartmentalized.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think we would agree anyway that the JavaScript environment is changing very rapidly. It's one of the things that's appealing about it. I've done a bunch of lunch club calls recently with people in the Chicago area, pretty much connecting person A to person A prime kind of thing. You want to know so-and-so, because they don't do that through the network. But I've really been kind of struck by the degree to which Ruby on Rails is really big there. I mean, it really kind of got its big start there, but that's kind of the core of where a lot of the technology is. But I've been talking to people at places like Slalom Consulting that basically they've been doing the same thing for 10 years, you know, with Ruby on Rails projects, and they're eager to be doing something different. So JavaScript is different than that, certainly.
Yes, I got Jet. Thanks, everyone. Have a good one, and
Thank you.
happy holidays.
Oh yeah, happy holidays. We have some other questions.
Doing for the matching itself, like you just put the information out there. There's some AI, so you're gonna like match people and figure out. And you say you're not gonna take feedback from the participants.
Well,
Yeah, how does that kind of? What are you thinking?
Yeah, Jim, are you still there? You want to talk about that a little bit, or should I? I know he had to take off for another meeting that was going to be on the hour, so I think he's probably not there. But we've been looking mostly at Spacey, you know, for a tool environment for that. And Jim has also run a bunch of stuff to generate profiles, to, you know, generate matching based on, you know, what we have from models. I think I mentioned earlier that we pulled about 10,000 models, model profiles and photos and description of what people are doing in these different freelance areas. And we tried to build up a model from that. It might be better to have, you know, 1 trillion of them. But, you know, it's probably good enough for what we want to do. And actually, we're just doing simple matching initially too, because there's basically these 3 different areas, and then we defined like 10 or 20 different subcategories in each one. So maybe if you do machine learning, you might be interested mainly in k-means clustering, or maybe it's visual oriented stuff, or if it's digital marketing, you might be more of an SEO person. You know, people have different kind of things that they focus on as specializations. So we're just doing matching based on that. But down the road, we wanted to have it be more just a reflection of what's in your profile. And so actually, if you change your profile, your network would change. It's like effective reality in a way. And that doesn't always work. I think, you know, when we actually started out with the initial thing with the 10,000 profiles, we thought, oh, we'll include the curriculum vitae, the education history, all those kind of things. But if you get somebody who studied speech language pathology, for example, and now they're doing digital marketing, it's not relevant to connect them based on that. So you just want what people are doing now, what their interest is now. And that's kind of a good thing about having be software specialization. And we've left out the work history because we figure that's just a basis for bias, especially in the freelance realm.
I would think so. Yeah, that's interesting. I was just thinking through, like, when you were talking, I was thinking like, oh my gosh, you know, people who like answer your questions on the forums, like, you know, their names and stuff.
Exactly.
Kind of cool. Like, how would you even, I mean, Stack Overflow, I don't know these people. Are they real people? I mean, I guess.
Yep.
Yeah, tapping into that is really cool. And yeah, you could like, you could pull my history of things I've been browsing, I suppose, if you wanted to be creepy, and that would give you
Yeah, the other thing is it seemed to us like, you can pose a question on Reddit or a Slack channel, community, or, Quora, stuff like that, and get an answer back maybe next week. And people experimented with, variations on that. But we wanted to enable people to just ask people in their network in almost real time or in real
Yeah.
time.
Get that formality out of there.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So we're trying to keep it really simple to make it, easier to change things as we see different ways in which that needs to work. And Firebase is a particularly good environment for that, Firebase and Vue. So we're just a few less changes would be okay.
Yeah, I'm on Vue too, and I'm thinking that's probably where I'm going to stay based on kind of what you were saying. But
Yeah.
I'll get there. Cool.
Yeah, I wish I had one source of documentation to really suggest as a model for this. In the Python realm, we kind of go to the Python site and you see what's there and you have all these big docs. When I first started doing stuff with Python, that was really kind of off-putting because you wanted to see how to, I should probably say here that I've worked with pretty much every programming language at one point or another. But it's not always been, a marriage made in heaven initially. And in the case of Python, it just took me a long time to figure out, where do you actually want to find out what's going on? Where do you want to concentrate? And I think that's a real issue for it. What kind of documentation do you have? In the Vue world, yeah, it's the Vue site itself has got pretty good documentation. Firebase has got the problem of Google writing the documents, like I said. So I'll actually find that I'll do queries and I'll put in the query -site:google.com.
And then you get real results.
I know. I forgot this is being recorded, but I could sort of, I can relate to that problem from the Intel world too, because it was just really hard to hear, what people were doing outside in the real world. There was a point in time where we did focus groups with people that were using Intel development tools. And so we could take all the video back to people and show them how eager people were to take their, their development system out in the parking lot and run it over with a pickup truck. So it's not necessarily, love at first sight kind of thing, but it's a problem that established environments really fall into. They do have, Google does have some really good evangelist people though. I mean, if you just, I think I mentioned some of them in the slides, if you just look for comments that have been made on Stack Overflow or wherever by those guys, they usually have the answer. Anyway, so any other questions?
How are you going to be doing video if you said you started thinking about that? I mean, are you using a service for that, or are you going to write it yourself?
Well, daily.co, actually, they did, they've done a couple of app notes on integrating the daily.co platform, either at the low level or at a more packaged high level into Vue applications. So we're pretty eager to be working with that, but both Jim and I have done several Twilio training sessions over the past 6 months or so as well. And somebody at Twilio had the bright idea for a marketing project that they would send out all of the ingredients to make cheddar cheese apple turnovers, speaking of bread. It's something different to do for the holidays. So I feel like, I kind of owe those guys because of that. It's a good company.
Were they good? Did you make them?
Well, yeah, it's kind of strange because we ended up with an odd mix of ingredients. They sent both cornstarch and corn syrup. And I first saw the corn syrup and I thought, what is corn syrup doing in this recipe? And I thought, well, they must have sent that instead of the cornstarch because I couldn't find it. So I put some of that in. So it ended up being a little bit different than maybe the original recipe was intended, but it was a celebrity chef kind of thing. You're supposed to follow along online. Yeah, it was just kind of a PR stunt. So, yeah. Yeah, we think that the timing here, and we're really kind of eager to be able to get this out to people as a way to start getting some feedback and remove bias and, you know, all that sort of thing. And I think we've been kind of shocked. Well, I've been shocked moving to Minnesota to have snow outside, although it melted in the past 24 hours, but it's probably going to come back. And we're sort of spread all around. Jim's in Portland, Oregon. Another one of my co-founders is in North Carolina, and then one person's in Berkeley. And we really would like to find a way. I don't know if anybody has encountered this, but Y Combinator in the Bay Area established an idea a few years ago, because I had raised a couple $1 million for a startup originally, doing the classic Series A thing, you know, for a venture-backed company. That was my previous company. We did mobile CRM, mostly for large corporate clients, including like Honeywell here, did some pilots. And I think we also talked to 3M, but we never got anywhere with that. But it was mostly in New York and Chicago and stopping over in the Twin Cities. And it just took so long doing that. The Y Combinator SAFE idea is a simple agreement for equity. And basically the idea is that you have a 1.5-page document that says, we don't know what the price of this is going to be, but we have 10 angel investors who would be happy to put in $500,000 collectively at a 30% discount to whatever the eventual price actually is when there's a real first round investment that happens. So that makes it a lot easier to do it. And we're thinking there could be an equivalent to that, to the SAFE kind of agreement, which has been pretty widely used on the West Coast anyway. I think they don't really know about it in New York yet. We'd like to find an equivalent to that for freelancers, because let's say something like the Firebase extensions for Stripe. We know that they exist. We haven't worked with the Stripe API. We haven't used the extension. So somebody that's already worked on a project in that specific area, it might take them 2 weeks to do what it would take us 2 months to do if, you know, we're starting from scratch. So we'd like to have a way to have 2-week projects, especially if you have some bandwidth available and you have other things that are paying for what you're doing, but basically get some equity in what we're doing in exchange for doing smaller kind of tasks as a freelancer. And so that's one of my side projects, is figuring out how we're going to do that as a mini SAFE essentially for freelancers. So anyway, yeah, I'm turning into a lawyer here.
All good. It happens. It happens to all of us one
Yeah.
time or another. I found myself in a similar situation earlier today. Well, cool. Any other questions for Craig? Okay, cool.
Yeah, I would say please be in touch if people have further questions or, you know, are interested in getting involved in some way. And I appreciate Brandon and Brian helping to put this together.
Yeah, thanks so much for coming by. I really appreciate your presentation, and everybody who's joined us this evening.